Hey, Business of Biotechers, this is Matt Pillar. And before we jump into today's episode, I have a big special announcement. On Monday, November 13th at 11 a.m. Eastern, we're taking the Business of Biotech live for a 1-hour, highly interactive web conversation with a special guest you won't want to miss. I'm planning a good 30-minute grilling of Blue Sphere Bio CEO and biotech legal expert, Cue Biopharma, on legal and IP protection considerations for new and emerging biotechs. Cue is an Esquire and a veteran biotech attorney turned CEO with a ton of experience. And when I'm done with him, I'll turn him over to a select group of viewers, you Business of Biotechers, who will have the benefit of 30 minutes of face-to-face Q&A and interaction with Cue and other members of the call. This hour will be incredibly consultative and offer great value at no cost but your time. And it's an opportunity for some face-to-face virtual networking with fellow Business of Biotech listeners who just so happen to be the coolest cats in the business. Go to the link in the show notes of today's episode to register, and I'll see you there. So here we are rounding out a quick trip to Boston today with a 2-for-1 episode to the headquarters of Cue Biopharma with CEO Dan Passeri and President and CSO Dr. Anish Suri. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and on today's show we're going to dig into Dan and Anish and how they're guiding the momentum of Cue's early and mid-clinical progress in a busy and competitive IL-2 field. Dan is no stranger to the Business of Biotech, having joined me in, 2020, maybe 120 episodes or so ago, back when we were a baby. And those of you familiar with my friend and colleague Erin Harris's podcast, Cell and Gene, might recognize Anish as a guest on her show, I believe early in 2022. Dan and Anish, thank you for allowing me to come in here, first of all, at your headquarters, and thanks for joining me.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Likewise, great to have you.
Yeah. So I want to start. Tell me a little bit about this place we're in, this space. So I drove in from downtown this morning to come here, and it occurred to me on the way in here that if you want to work in Boston, you should either be in life sciences or construction, because there's a lot of both going on. And this immediate area, it just seems like it's the entire block is under construction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what brought us here was obviously Cambridge being the hub of biotech, and as biotech was growing, the cost of real estate became concerning, the amount of money we were paying per square footage. So we, several years ago, started looking at alternative locations. And this is an area we're in an area that's called the Brighton area of Boston, which is just across the Charles River. Cambridge is just over the bridge. And it's a growing area. We're actually in the Celtics building. They practice up in the top floor. But
in this very building?
In this very building,
Yep.
yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yeah. So it's just very convenient for the employees. We have mass transit still available. The trains run right by this general area, and the routes are basically concentrated into the Star Drive area, where this is just off of Star Drive. So it's very convenient. It's actually a quicker commute for a significant number of the employees and where we were in Cambridge. So it's been a great move and a good facility.
It wasn't a quicker commute for Dr. Suri this morning. What is the New Balance building right next door? Is that like New Balance headquarters?
It's New Balance headquarters. They have a number of businesses in that facility. They actually have a concert hall in there.
Oh, really?
What's great for the employees is a lot of really nice restaurants in the general area. It's a great place to get together for meetings. So I think this section of Boston is growing quite significantly.
Well, what do you have going on in this building? What does Cue have going on?
Yeah, this is where we're located. So we have our labs here. So this
Yeah.
is where we conduct all of our research, except where we do manufacturing at a contract research organization. Mm-hmm. But we do basically all of our studies here, and this is where all the employees are located. We do have one small facility in San Diego where our chief medical officer is located.
Okay. Yeah. So every employee, how many employees do you have in this building?
Right now we're about 55 employees,
yeah.
And we've held firm between 50 and 55.
Yeah, very good, very good. So Dan, the last time that you were on the podcast. It was actually episode 41, my notes tell me. 41. This is, just for reference, I don't know if you're aware, this will be like episode 170 something. So yeah, we've come a long way. I don't remember if that was during COVID, if I interviewed you like from my spare bedroom at my house or not. I don't remember, but it was April of 21, and at the time, Cue was in its, according to my notes, 7th phase 1 clinical cohort with Q101 as a monotherapy, and had just dosed your first patient in a combination trial. So I was hoping we could, if that's correct, in that
sounds about right.
Sounds about right. Yeah, I was hoping we could maybe have a little update on where that candidate is today.
Sure, I'll give you an overview of that. So we made substantial progress since then. So we've completed both the phase 1 monotherapy, and the point of the monotherapy in this, you alluded to the fact this is a crowded space. One of the important features that you need to focus upon early on is to demonstrate that your drug has activity as a monotherapy, a single agent. Because when you're using combination with another drug, unless you've demonstrated that, you have to enroll a much larger number of patients to demonstrate a statistical spread. So we started off with a monotherapy, we completed that, the data actually has played out beautifully for us. We've clearly demonstrated the drug's active, it's dose proportional, the drug behaves consistently well, well tolerated, and most importantly for patients, we're seeing demonstrable clinical benefit where patients have had a very significant enhancement of survival as a monotherapy. And this is in third-line refractory patients. So these are patients that have failed multiple other therapies, including checkpoint blockade. And what we're doing is stimulating the patient's immune system so that the population of T cells will recognize a given cancer as a foreign entity and attack. So it's the patient's immune system that's actually the therapeutic, and that's what's, I think, revolutionary about this field. And so the monotherapy, we clearly demonstrated actually it's about a doubling of median overall survival. So that's really very positive data for us. Yeah. And then in the combination, which is that we just started the combination study when we last spoke, we've completed enrolling 20 patients plus. And that data actually has cooperated really well. It's showing that when you combine it with the standard of care in frontline, so these are patients that have just been recently diagnosed with recurrent metastatic HPV-driven head and neck cancer. Pembrolizumab, with this PD-1 inhibitor, is the standard of care. We've basically more than doubled the overall response rate of pembrolizumab. It looks like we're going to be doubling the progression-free survival, and that's the amount of time they stay on drug without any demonstrable tumor growth. Too early to say on median overall survival, but the monotherapy and what we're seeing to date in the combination looks highly encouraging. Importantly, in that study, we've reached patients that have what's called a CPS score, which is basically indicative of, and I'll let Anish touch upon that. That's basically a measurement of how immunologically active the tumor is. It's a measurement of how much PD-L1 is being expressed, and that's how tumors defend themselves against attacking T cells. So requisite is that the patient has T cells trying to attack the cancer. So if you have a low CPS score, it just basically shows you don't have an immunologically active tumor. And what the data appears to suggest is that our drug is activating the immune system in patients that don't have a population of T cells trying to attack the cancer. And therefore, it's expanding the patients that are benefiting from pembrolizumab. And that's a really important observation. So these are early data still, but we're really encouraged by what we've seen to date. Now, Anish, do you want to elaborate on the PD-1 and the CPS aspect of it?
I think, Matt, the fundamental premise is if you don't have the right T cell repertoire, the application of a checkpoint is a futile endeavor. The checkpoints act upon only if there's tumor-relevant T cells. At the highest, if you took a 30,000-foot view of the problem, the Immunostat platform not only induces the cells in the first instance, in this case HPV-specific T cells, but we have evidence of it doing it in the tumor lesions, really inducing T cell activation. So that is a precursor to any checkpoint application. So when you have patients with low PD expression in the tumor environment, these low CPS scores, historically they have been refractory to checkpoint blockade, and one assumption for that, or one thought behind that, is the fact that they may not have the right T-cell repertoire. So for example, in Pembro's frontline approval study in head and neck cancer, if you gauge on the low CPS score patients, which is 50% of all eligible patients, it's not a minor fraction, it's a pretty significant fraction, the response rate of Pembro is about 14%. When you combine Q101 with Pembro in that very cohort, the response rate is 50%.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about going, this is not incremental, this is pretty transformative to see a 3x differential.
Yeah.
And that's the principle of the technology and the platform, is the targeted approach for really eliciting the right tumor-specific T cells.
Very cool. Excellent progress. And as you guys know, one of the intentions of this show is to sort of dissect the role of executive leadership in new and emerging biopharma. So my next set of questions, I want to dig into the roles that each of you have played in that progression, right? Like over the course of the last 2 years, from two contexts. One, internally, operations-wise, what your roles have consisted of in driving this progress, and then externally from a business management perspective around funding and resource allocation, that kind of thing. So, and Anish, I know you started, you came here a couple years after Dan.
In 2018. So company was still preclinical at that point in time. I was in a global expat role with Janssen in Belgium, had a sort of a broad remit, and Dan spoke to me. I got excited about the technology, and I never thought I'd be resigning from a global expat role, but I did.
It was one of the questions I had for you, what the motivation was to leave that a pretty big, comfortable, and cushy position to come work for a young company.
Yeah, I mean, the science was very compelling, Matt, at that point in time, and my own sort of career has been focused on understanding how the T-cell receptor makes the decision between self versus non-self. And that is probably the mother of all checkpoints, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
How does the T-cell know that what I'm seeing is foreign and hence I should attack, versus what I'm seeing is self and I should not? I mean, it's the highest level of immune balance sort of question one's attained, and this platform gets to a very central thesis of enabling that recognition. So this was very elegant protein engineering, and you follow the science where it takes you. Science took us to Belgium from the US, and science brought us from Belgium to Boston for the same reason.
So I'll start with you on Dr. Suri on sort of this roles-based activity that you've played as CSO. You joined the company as CSO?
I joined the company as CSO, and then I think then about a year and a half after that, I took on the president's role.
So from an internal perspective, think about facilities, outsourcing, people, the talent that's here in this building. What would you say? It's a big general question. It's almost an unfair question to ask because you could go a million different directions with it. But what would you say your role has been, like the leading points of your role have been in the context of those internal things in moving Q101 forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the sort of centric themes comes back to the quality and robustness of data that one generates. I often sort of tell my team it's the business of science and data is the currency. There's nothing else, you can do the same sort of repeat PowerPoint presentations, and after the third one, people stop paying attention. You've got to generate high quality data. So as a principle, we've maintained a very tight group. Our core competencies internally in research have focused on a very hard emphasis on cellular immunology. We are in the business of immunology and protein engineering, which is this first-in-class, first-in-man biologics platform. Remember, Q101 is the first of its kind ever to have gone into man. If you just think about that road of taking something novel in, I mean, this could have gone many different ways. I mean, we are not only seeing efficacy and a tremendous signal, but now an opportunity to really expand the platform. So we've held on to those core competencies. We then built out an excellent clinical development group, got an excellent CMO in place, Matteo Levisetti, who's based in San Diego, who happens to be an immunologist, MD by training, highly qualified, experience in large pharma, Roche, Pfizer, experience in small biotechs like Mirati, DNAX. That was a very deliberate part of just building out with the right sort of person who knew not only about clinical execution, but actually knew immunology. because you want to do these trials with an intent of translational data sets.
Yeah.
But not in the just looking at safety, tolerability. You want to go beyond that, and having that sort of a group helps. And he's built out really a fantastic group, and that again comes into the growth of the organization. Where we've sort of been very agile has been in outsourcing and having very strong relationships for production of our drug material, competencies that we right now don't sort of foresee that we need immediately in-house. These things are pretty tough to sort of, from a resource, to have manufacturing capabilities.
Yeah.
And the reason we could do that seamlessly on the outside is because the drug essentially is made exactly like an antibody molecule. So that is actually works very well in our favor, because you have a novel biologics platform of tackling a very fundamental immunological question, which is how do you selectively only perturb the T cells that are relevant to disease, but you're doing it with a biologic scaffold whose production is quite boring. It's 30 plus years of commercial monoclonal production. So we didn't have to, we could easily go to any CDMO on the outside, get this made. The yields are in like an antibody in grams per liter. Cost of goods are like an antibody molecule. So everything works out very favorably for us to be able to really exploit that with maximal efficiency. And that's been a part of sort of the operation side of the role, which comes under the precedence umbrella, is looking at this execution, looking at clinical sort of strategies, and working closely with our clinical development team on the manufacturing side, maintaining capabilities and competencies there. We again built out that organization as we were going into the clinic, have an excellent, really qualified individual leading our CMC team who also comes with extensive experience.
Do some of those folks interact like in an intentional and consistent way with your outsourcing partners, or?
They have to. I mean, look, it's all about relationship, Matt. At the end of the day, a small biotech relies on having very strong relationships with partner organizations that support you. And that's at the level of organizations that are supporting you through translational data sets, PK, PD analysis, that's through manufacturing. And a lot of this is contingent upon people within our organization that have these. So we happen to have, and unfortunately we've had talent that has actually been with the company for a significant amount of time. I mean, we've really been very fortunate to have an excellent group of colleagues who sort of understand what this potential could be. And in biotech years, have been in eons with us.
Yeah.
And they've really built these relationships with external partners that have been of tremendous value to us. Mm-hmm. That's a very important sort of aspect you raised.
Dan, it sounds like Anish is doing all the work.
That's how I planned it.
Yeah, good job. So the CEO's role has been to hire Anish, and
I'm just going to paraphrase what Anish just articulated. I mean, in reality, hiring Anish was a critical decision for the company in terms of its next stage of evolution. And biotech, particularly developing cancer drugs, a lot of uncertainty, and there are a number of risk factors that you need to understand and manage really well. And the number one risk factor when you're early as a company is ensuring you have the appropriate competencies to evolve. And hiring rapidly new staff is not how you address that. You need to have sort of integrated, coordinated planning processes, standard operating procedures. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to hire somebody who had deep knowledge of immunology, experience in drug discovery and drug development, and could understand sort of dynamically how a company goes through various stages. So Anish's role really has been pivotal in establishing a corporate culture of integrity, the right studies. That's a really important aspect of this. He's being humble. He actually is managing and overseeing the process of what are the right questions to ask, because risk is manifests in a number of ways. One is, do you have the right people? Do you know what you're doing? Do you have quality control, quality assurance, so that your standards are rigorous, so you don't have variance? Mm-hmm. But also resolving uncertainty. That's what we get paid to do. As we navigate forward, we're answering questions that have to be addressed. And the uncertainties are manifest. We have many uncertainties because it's a drug that's never been used before.
Yeah.
So how you design your studies, how you design your clinical trials, that has to be done with foresight and insight. And it's taken for granted when you navigate through that, but that takes a lot of experience. So having Anish at the helm, understanding you can't just get there, you have to map it out and hire the right people, and that was critical. And now this data we talked about is presenting itself because of the way these studies have been designed, with real insight of how immunology works. We're asking the right questions, we're measuring the right biomarkers. So now we're at a point where we've demonstrated the drug works, and now we have a platform behind it. And that platform development requires a preclinical team that's connected to the clinical, right? So it's an integrated, coordinated process. It's very dynamic, but having someone at the helm who sees that big picture and has a vision of where it needs to go and asks the right questions to help you navigate to get there, that's no trivial task. So that was hiring Anish, and Anish is basically fundamental in deploying that.
Yeah.
My job now as CEO is basically working with Anish as my primary partner, but the team, the management team, and assessing what are the risk factors up ahead, what are the headwinds that we're facing. So the capital markets are, let's say, dislocated right now, distressed.
Yeah.
We actually, it's not that we knew what was going to happen, but we kind of foresaw that we were in the middle of a bubble. It was quite clear that the capital markets overstimulated biotech sector because of COVID, the promise of vaccines. You had a lot of, I would call it, I don't want to say unsophisticated, but generalist capital going into biotech where they really didn't understand the complexities and vagaries, and too many companies were formed. And we could see it happening. And the key metric actually that we paid attention to happened to be the cost of real estate. It was going up so rapidly that you knew this is unhealthy growth.
Yeah.
So we actually moved from Cambridge to this location before it was self-evident that we were in the middle of a downturn.
Yeah.
So we got ahead of it. And that's actually one of my primary functions, is to kind of predict where things are going, make sure we're making the appropriate adjustments before it's self-evident, making decisions before you have complete information. So it's calculated risk management. And obviously, capital markets, we have to interface with this dislocated ecosystem and keep investors confident that despite the fact that the stock has had a downturn with the entire sector, we're actually performing really well. We're in a better position than we ever have been. And we believe we're on the cusp of a breakthrough in immunotherapy, in immuno-oncology. And I want to remind you, our drugs do nothing to cancer itself. They stimulate the patient's immune system to recognize cancer as foreign. And with 101, we've demonstrated that. Now with 102, our second drug, which is targeting something called Wilms tumor 1, which is highly expressed in a number of cancers, both solid and hematologic, we're seeing anti-tumor activity. Right? And this is a very profound breakthrough. Let's say it's a single agent. Again, these are patients that are refractory. Their cancers have relapsed or been resistant to prior therapy, so they have a very poor prognosis. And we're seeing as a single agent that it's having anti-tumor activity, which means the patient's immune system, we've activated T cells that are recognizing cancer as foreign. So all of this comes from Anish being brought on in 2018, the team being built very methodically, and the right questions being asked. So now we're seeing the result of all that work.
Yeah. You talked about the capital market situation, the changes that we've seen there over the course of the last couple of years, and you also said that it's sort of your job to have the foresight to see what's coming. Do you notice any changes at this point? One, do you see any changes on the horizon in terms of smarter investment from the investment community? And two, looking forward, how has Cue adjusted adjusted its fundraising strategy?
Two things. One, looking ahead with foresight. One thing we've done really well is we've been very disciplined historically. We've never grown rapidly. We've just been very methodical and very consistent. And that allows us to stay focused. A lot of capital headwinds right now, and to your question, a number of these specialist funds, they have very insightful fund managers, and they're looking for asset classes that are emerging with meaningful data that separates them from a lot of the noise. And we're getting attention with this clinical data. I think what's really important, one, they're looking for clarity on how to navigate forward, and if you're raising capital, what are you going to do with that capital, and are you creating value during that period of time? For us, the important emphasis is this is a platform. We're not an HPV, head and neck cancer company.
Yeah.
It's a protein engineering platform that stimulates the immune system with exquisite selectivity, so we can dial in any activity for a particular cancer as long as we understand what protein is relevant to cancer. And that's starting to be noticed. We've clearly differentiated from a lot of noise and from the competition. As far as I know, we're the only company deploying a IL-2 in the manner where we can dose it at the level we're dosing it, dial in that selectivity where IL-2's activity is turning on the desired T cells and not affecting, the majority of the immune system. And that's the problem with injecting IL-2 into a patient's body. It's indiscriminate. So we have found a way to dial in specificity, which is to take advantage of the way nature has dialed in specificity, and that's through the T cell receptor. We target the T cell receptor. So the capital markets, the funds that really understand the space are starting to actually pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. We don't intend to go out and just raise capital because we need capital. We're trying to be very strategic about it. We're now in the process of talking to strategic partners, potential strategic partners, to build tension there where we can create a competitive auction of companies that are interested in what we're doing. That will give us sort of more flexibility with the capital market interactions. So we've been very disciplined. We're looking at strategic alternatives for accessing capital, and we're being proactive about it. We're not raising capital because we have to. Yeah. We're raising capital in a strategic manner that allows us to basically focus on what's in front of us, but also make sure that the vision of what we can do with that capital is clear.
I want to get back to something that you mentioned around clinical trial design. Yeah. You said a couple of times it's imperative to ask the right questions, to know what questions to ask and ask the right question. So Anish, I'm curious, like what you draw on. This is your first new, like, emerging bio job, right?
This is, yeah. So my career previous to this has been in large pharma, J&J, Janssen, BMS.
So I'm curious about the experiences that you draw on when it comes to guiding a clinical trial design, for instance, to know what questions to ask, to know which questions are the right ones.
Yeah, look, a lot of this is done in very close collaboration, obviously, with the CMO, which was one of the reasons we brought on who we brought on, because mm-hmm. of that early development expertise. So it's not an en masse effect of just, it's actually a very deliberate effect of choosing indications. Dan talked about Q102, for example. This molecule can apply to almost 15 different cancers. Yet we've chosen, by virtue of what our team, Matteo Levisetti, Steve Quayle, internally, who's also the head of our translational medicine, along talking with KOLs. The indications we've actually chosen to go in are colorectal, ovarian, pancreatic, and gastric. Mm-hmm. And there was a reason for that, because there's a significant unmet need. If you think about it, all these indications are quite refractory to checkpoint. Checkpoints have not worked here. And the fact that we're seeing single agent activity now positions us to really be in the forefront. That positions you, as opposed to going in an indication where checkpoints are active and then people questioning, well, is it you, the checkpoint, etc. All these patients are failed checkpoints. So that's a very deliberate but pointed example on how clever thinking can position the asset in a very meaningful way to really bring forward the benefit to the patient. And that has obviously even downstream consequences as you think about registration approaches, potential combos. That ball's in your court and how you sort of position it. Rather than following the field, you can take a step back and understand your science and establish your path that others appreciate.
What kind of, I guess, describe for me what kind of work goes into preparation for a registrational trial in terms of like teams and what's the day-to-day activity in prepping for that?
It's actually quite an involved process, Matt. Our teams.
Another unfair question to ask because it could take you all day.
But again, these are competencies that we're building. We're fortunate to have the right people within the organization who are also interfacing with the right sort of regulatory experts on the external we've been fortunate to have had a very meaningfully productive relationship with the FDA. The first example of this was actually when we got the IND approval for our second clinical candidate, Q102, where we convinced the agency that Q101 and 102 are 99% sequence identical. The only difference is the T cell specificity, which is about a 9 to 10 amino acid segment. Q101 goes after HBV. Q102, as I mentioned, goes after Wilms tumor 1. So once we've de-risked Q101, we sort of present the case to the agency that we thought we didn't need to do the IND enabling toxicology studies again, because the molecule had been de-risked, and that IL-2 framework is the constant, and that we should be allowed to start the trial at a higher dose. And the agency came back, listened to the arguments, and this again, kudos to the team that put forward the discussion, and agreed on both points. And that's a first in precedence in my career where you've used the first molecule to essentially de-risk the entire platform. So for 102, we did not have to do any further IND enabling studies. And we started that trial at a mg per kg, which saved us about almost a year's worth of dose escalation. So think about the resource, time, cost efficiencies for a small biotech. To be able to get that data, operations, but that's kudos to the team on how you position this. And that's an example of smart regulatory strategy that has a read-through. If you went the old conventional way, you said, well, let's do another IND enabling talk, and that has its own money, you spend money on primates, time, and let's do the complete dose escalation. Well, you could think about the problem slightly differently. So similarly now, when the team's thinking about having and sort of setting up for a discussion with the regulatory agency of potential registrational path opportunities in a Q101 trial, particularly on the monotherapy and the combo signals that are emerging, these are the constant dynamics of making sure we're asking the right questions, that we're being very clear with our intent, we're being clear with the sort of our trial design, clear with the expectations the agency has, to really gain that alignment. And that really comes from having a group within that understands this, and again, it comes back to the talent within the organization. You don't have to build it all within, but having the right people within allows you to interface with the right people on the outside to really build an ecosystem.
When it comes to turning your innovations into clinical realities, the first step is transforming your process. On the Business of Biotech podcast, we bring emerging biotechs weekly insights to advance their pipelines, from funding to regulatory and other need-to-know topics. The pod is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva, a global provider of technologies and services that advance and accelerate the development, manufacture, and delivery of therapeutics. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Anish, what were you, this is a dangerous question to ask you in front of your boss. What were you least prepared for? In hindsight, what were you least prepared for when joining Cue, coming from a resource flush?
I think Dan captured this well, which is when you're in the business of innovation and you're watching the resource constraints very carefully, you want to make sure you don't have the luxury of dabbling. You don't have the luxury of sort of having two of the same on the bench in terms of your talent assessments organization. So that to me was a good experience because it allows you to build competencies with intent, and it allows you to focus resources with intent. We've not taken on too much, and things that we've taken on, we've done them at depth. And that's a very important sort of element of execution that perhaps can be overlooked in an organization where resources may be more in abundance. So you have to sort of think twice before you spend once. And that's actually a good experience for everybody. I think everybody should sort of come to that sort of consensus and understanding on how do you judiciously position necessity is the mother of sort of innovation.
I mean, some of that is necessity. To your point about the capital markets, has it felt? Has the capital market constriction felt any more exacerbated, sort of, in the IL-2 space, given some of the recent failures? I mean, is the market's perception of IL-2 a little bit shaky right now, perhaps?
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point. If you back up and you think about, okay, why was IL-2 invested in the way it was? Mm-hmm. And it's been known for years, IL-2 is our body's way of activating T cells. So clearly it's a very relevant and important molecule. So that's a given. However, the approach to activating has not had a lot of, let's say, foresight or insight, and that injecting a bolus of IL-2, just injecting IL-2 into the human body, is an absurd premise because the receptor for IL-2 is located in multiple cell types throughout your body. So if you inject an indiscriminate molecule, you're going to activate everything it comes in contact with. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened with wild-type IL-2, an extraordinarily dangerous drug in the sense that the deleterious side effects are profound. In fact, it's a very thin margin between causing fatality and helping the patient with cancer. Because you're trying to activate a rare T cell population, a very infrequent number of cells amongst a large population of cells. And yet IL-2 is activating everything.
Yeah.
So that central premise, we had companies being formed by just altering the molecule a bit, but it was still indiscriminate. We were established as a company because of the ability to dial in specificity because of the way the molecule is designed by targeting the T cell receptor. And that is fundamentally a distinction between what we're doing and what's occurred with other IL-2 modalities. So the fact that we've had high-profile failures, one, not surprising, and two, what happens is an overreaction to a generalized conclusion. Well, there's a problem with IL-2. That itself is an absurd conclusion. IL-2 is what the body uses. The conclusion should be the approach we've been using historically is not a rational approach. You have to have specificity. And that's where we feel we clearly are differentiated. We're still standing and we're succeeding. So I think what's going to happen over the coming year plus is the data we're generating is getting more and more attention. Pharmaceutical companies are starting to sit up and take note. We're actually able to administer high levels of drug, and we don't see these deleterious side effects. And we're seeing the desired activity, where we're clearly seeing the T cell population that we're targeting increase in number, and we're clearly seeing anti-tumor activity. Mm-hmm. So I think what we have to do is just stay focused, and eventually logic will prevail. And as investors start to just think more critically about what occurred historically with IL-2 and what we're actually demonstrating, I think it'll begin to resonate. I think the market's starting to understand what we're doing is a path forward.
Yeah. Do you see the competitive landscape thinning out?
Certainly.
Yeah.
There's a number of failures with IL-2 that those companies, their assets have disappeared. Companies based on IL-2 have disappeared. There's a lot of strain. And what we're going through philosophically, this downturn in the capital markets, it overstimulates and then it's a weeding out, right? It's a filtering out which companies actually don't have a solution, because these are very complex questions you're asking, and it's difficult for investors to understand what's going to work and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
So the key now is to ensure we have staying power, that we're generating data that is clearly showing we have a solution to how to deploy IL-2.
Yeah, yeah. Do the indications that you're pursuing play into that strategy at all? I'm just curious about that because you think about HPV-driven head and neck cancers. The forecast for HPV-driven head and neck cancers is not pretty. That's
it's a tough cancer.
It's a super tough cancer, and the prevalence is only forecast to grow among generations like ours who are pre-Gardasil, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if that plays into sort of the investor appeal. I think is probably sophomoric. I'm sorry, the retail investor appeal is probably sophomoric. Like, oh, geez, there's a company that's working on one of the largest indications, known forecast moving forward. I want to get on board. Obviously, there's nuance there, right? The devil's in the details. But does it sort of play into the strategy?
I'll answer it generically, and I'll ask Anish to elaborate.
Yeah.
Strategically, the first drug was a virally driven cancer. HPV-driven head and neck cancer. And the virus is tumorigenic, meaning it is the nexus to cancer, it's causing cancer. So we're targeting, in that case, a viral epitope. And we, again to remind you, we went into monotherapy in advanced stage, a really difficult situation, and we've demonstrated the drug in those patients stimulating their T cells, and immune system is reacting to cancer, and we're seeing a clear demonstration of prolonged median overall survival. So that was really encouraging. And then in combination with the checkpoint, we're seeing what looks like mechanistic complementary activity. And we're really encouraged in that setting. However, the important feature now is in 102. Checkpoints don't typically work in those cancers, and the reason is they're not immunologically active enough. And yet we're seeing what looks like a real trend as we dose escalate. Looks like the drug is activating the immune system is attacking cancer. So that's a really important distinction. We now have kind of foundational data with 101, and 102 is demonstrating greenfield space. These are cancers that are not responsive to checkpoints. If we're now activating the patient's immune system, T cells, against cancer, where they are clearly demonstrating anti-tumor activity, we've now opened that field up for immuno-oncology, and we've transformed the space. So that was a deliberate strategy. Go for a viral antigen. WT1 is non-viral. It's called an oncofetal protein. It's a protein that's expressed during embryonic development, basically fostering cascades of activity for tissue formation, and in the adult it's quiescent. Not surprising, tumors hijack that biology to influence behavior of surrounding cells. So we're targeting that protein, and we're seeing anti-tumor effect in a number of cancers. And Anish, do you want to elaborate?
No, I think you've covered. Look at the highest level when we do the indication analysis. We spend a fair bit of time thinking about what are the targets. So the viral proto-oncogene is a frank non-self target. The immune system should be able to recognize it because it's something foreign from the virus. Same principle for WT1 because it's an oncofetal antigen. Behind that, we've got the pipeline with really validated targets. MAGE-A4. It's a validated cancer testis antigen. Mutated KRAS. KRAS is a primary cancer driver. We know that mutated KRAS fuels the genesis of tumor cells. The G12 cysteine covalent inhibitors that are now approved in a small molecule is one way of approaching it. We've taken these KRAS mutated epitopes that make for T cell epitopes and put them into our platform. So again, a very deliberate strategy going after a very well characterized primary tumor driver. And so, behind that sort of thinking, Matt, you can build a really rich pipeline of assets that go across, because a lot of these antigens and mutations are shared across cancers. Pancreatic, 80% I think is KRAS mutated at that hotspot mutation of G12. Lung, colorectal, massive indications, with significant unmet need. I mean, colorectal, when you think about it, not only the fact that the enormous incidence, but the fact, as you've noticed now, in younger and younger populations coming down with this. So there's obviously been a shift in the etiology of disease, pathogenesis, that we still need to fully understand, but it's clearly apparent that young adults are succumbing to colorectal at an earlier age.
Right.
So at that position, so us to sort of be able to deploy these kind of efforts in a very meaningful manner. And to something earlier that was said, the analogy I've often used on the outside with the platform, and IL-2 specifically, when Dan talked about it, is, you don't need to set your house on fire to light up your kitchen stove. And that's a good way of looking at what the platform does. You only need to light up the right consumer T cells that have tumor specificity while you avoid the carpet bombing of the entire immune system. That's how you create a therapeutic index for any immune activation signal. And other IL-2s have not been able to do that because they're variants of the same wild type, but still equal opportunity agonists of every T cell. So when you couple in the selectivity, specificity with the choice of the antigen, you open up a wide universe of available cancers that you can really, we think, can make a significant dent.
You guys okay on time?
Yeah.
Time for just a couple more? I'm curious about your kind of go forward plans as you move deeper into clinical trials. So how has clinical progress sort of affected your development manufacturing strategy, for instance? Have you changed your position on outsourcing as you move deeper into the clinic?
So we, from the manufacturing side, we again, we're very fortunate to get a very experienced individual, Sid Srivastava, who leads our CMC team. And again, strategically, what we've done, Matt, is establish a very meaningful relationship with a couple of distinct partners, manufacturing, fill finish, etc. And that allows us to utilize established precedents and competencies to just keep on expanding the pipeline. It worked well for us. Mm-hmm. Something that you pointed out earlier, a lot of the external interfacing is developing strong business relationships with mutual respect, particularly for a small biotech, because a lot of these CDMOs are serving larger partners, that may be more lucrative. But we've managed to have their attention, and they've actually appreciated the science that goes behind what we do. We make it a point that even though they are the external partners, that we provide them regular clinical updates so they understand the molecules that they are producing and what they're actually demonstrating in the patient. Just as we do sometimes with our internal colleagues. I mean, that's a great motivator to see what you're involved in is just not a vial, it's just that you're actually going and having an impact on human health. Mm-hmm. So we've maintained these strategic relationships, and I think that's been, so far, has worked quite well for us. We've gone through assessments and obviously honed in on a certain few of these external vendors, and I've stuck with them because they've delivered for us. We utilize the same competencies for Q102, for example, going back, and that just allows you to build depth and competencies, in that relationship that allow you to service the pipeline as it emerges.
Any advice you would offer young biopharma, new biopharma companies that haven't contracted with an outsourced manufacturer around accountability, contracting, sort of management of the relationship? Any specific advice you throw out there?
I mean, my experience through this has been you should do the diligence on scanning. There's a lot of optionality when it comes to contract manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And you've got to understand at the level of the people that you're going to be interfacing. So oftentimes you'll have the A team do the BD conversation with you, and there's a different team that does the work for you. I don't like that personally. I want to be able to talk to the very people they're going to stick, and I want to see the same people repeatedly when I go back to the services. Yeah. So turnover is a big, it's an element that you must, as a variable, to watch out for, because you're only as good as the people that you're interacting with on the other side. Yeah. So I like to see the same team members being present from one manufacturing run to the other, and having a consensus and a sort of a relationship thread there, rather than a new person answering the door every time you show up. It just doesn't allow you to build that out. But that's something you've got to be prepared for up front. Yeah. And this is something we've learned through our experiences. The people you want to talk to from the get-go are the very people you want to be interacting with later stage.
Dan, you wanted to add something?
No, just to highlight what Anish is stating, because it's not a trivial detail, and that is when you use an outside source, it doesn't mean you're handing over the responsibility. That's our responsibility. Yeah. And it has to do with your competencies. So as Anish stated, our head of CMC is very talented, he's very insightful and experienced, but he has contact points, touch points with that organization, and you need to monitor and interact with it organically. It's not just an arm's length. Yeah. That's a fundamental component to your business. So if you're outsourcing it, it's a relationship, and you need to foster it, you need to manage it. You need to make sure they have the right, qualifications, capabilities, QA, QC, protocol. It's a professional operation. So we don't just outsource it and, it's a contract. It's a living relationship that we're evolving. And that's really based on who we have overseeing it.
Yeah. I laugh because as we sit here right now, this episode will air a few weeks from now, but as we sit here, the Bioprocess International show is taking place down the road at the convention center, and there are a whole lot of men and women walking around that show floor in fancy suits, doing BD for CMOs and CDMOs, making big promises. And I really like the point that you made about integrating the BD and execution interfaces, because being sold, a contract is a whole lot different than executing them. It's a great point.
Yeah, but to what Dan said, we never expect to outsource the accountability. That's always with us. Mm-hmm. At the end, the buck stops with us, so we take that pretty seriously.
Yeah,
and that has to be a mindset. You're not just putting this outside over the fence, and now it's your problem, and just come back. And I think that's a recipe for disaster, particularly for a small company. You've got to be breathing this in and out. You've got to be making site visits, presence there, whatever the work's happening, which we do on a regular basis. I think you've got to just insert yourself and integrate.
Very good. So what's next? What's on the immediate horizon for Cue, and then more personally for each of you?
So in terms of the horizon, I think what's important is where have we come from, where are we standing, and where are we going? Mm-hmm. So we've accomplished what we consider to be the foundational data to demonstrate what we do is relevant, it works. This is important for patients. It's important for the future of immuno-oncology. So now, how do we now grow as a company, particularly with the headwinds in the capital market that we're facing? And I think the key is to innovate, even on your business operations. How do we become more efficient? How do we scale when capital is so difficult to come by? Mm-hmm. And it's forming strategic relationships. It's understanding what we're doing matters not just to us and our shareholders, but it matters profoundly to patients, and it matters to pharmaceutical companies that are trying to get a foothold in immuno-oncology or expand their presence in immuno-oncology to complement their own drugs. So at this juncture, it's really being very thoughtful about the next strategic move that allows us to scale and build out the platform. Again, I want to repeat, we're not an HPV head and neck cancer company, although that's our lead program. Mm-hmm. So one thing we're not going to do is take limited resources, raise capital, and just focus on a registration path for a drug. That's a very tactical move. It's not very strategic. We're a platform. And our vision is to transform the treatment of oncology with the deployment of that platform across multiple cancers. So the key for us now is to scale in a very efficient means to enhance our productivity and to be able to build the platform out. So that's the vision of where we're headed, and we have to accomplish that without the need for just building bricks and mortars and doubling our FTE count. We have to be more creative than that. We have to be innovative on our business strategy, aligning ourselves with the appropriate strategic partners. So that's what we're actually busy right now thinking through, mapping that out.
Yeah.
The personal question, I don't actually think more than the 2 quarters ahead of me what I'm doing with my personal life. So
I didn't mean so much with your personal life, just the personal, I guess, professional responsibility. Not that I anticipate you're going to tell me that you're, looking to found a new company or anything, but
no, I'll just answer it personally. At this point in my career, and this point in my development, age-wise, this is a very serious endeavor, and Anish and I work very closely on mapping out strategy, and what I'm not wanting to do is to be in the same position 2 years from now. We have to evolve, and we have to be bold and do something meaningful. So as a personal career objective, I really want to transform how cancer is treated. And I think we're on the verge of doing that with this platform. So the key is strategically to make key decisions in the coming quarters that allow us to expand our capacity in a very efficient manner. So really what I want to do is have business innovation in terms of our overarching organizational interactions with other companies, and to accomplish some key strategic relationships in the coming year and a half that transforms this business and the space. That's personally what I want to do.
Yeah. When you and I talked a couple of years ago, when you were on the show, we talked about the fact that you come from a legal background. You have a J.D. And I think at that point you talked a bit about how you leaned into your legal chops, right? At that point early in the company's development. Is that kind of a bit of a reprieve at this point in the company's development? Like you're not necessarily, or do you still lean into?
It's actually a continuum in that what we're doing is innovating. And what we're doing is actually, we believe we're changing the landscape. And by doing that, when you take risk capital and you start to accomplish and demonstrate what you hypothesized you could do, and you resolve risk, what happens is you end up with other companies now trying, it's called a free rider problem. You've taken on all that initial risk, you have resolved uncertainty, and you've demonstrated the feasibility and created value. Well, if you don't have strong intellectual property, that landscape becomes eroded by companies trying to map around you and copy what you're doing. And they don't have to basically recover all that risk capital.
Yeah.
So intellectual property is foundational and core to the platform, what we do. We hired a very experienced patent litigator as our general counsel early on. I've worked with him for years. He's very strategic. We have a very deep, robust intellectual property pipeline, and we continue to manage that pipeline very actively. So in fact, just last week, Anish, our counsel, and a couple of the scientists sat and we mapped out a couple of strategies in an area that we wanted to shore up. So we're always thinking about that.
Yeah. All right. Once a lawyer, always a lawyer. How about you, Anish? More on the personal, the integration of personal and professional. What's on your immediate agenda?
Yeah. Look, I'll start with the personal. This obviously was a significant commitment, moving the family. It was very disruptive for the first 6 months, but we thought the science was compelling. So for me, it's been really gratifying to see this actually play out. From 2018, when we were preclinical, to now, where we've got 2 assets in the clinic addressing 5 different solid cancers. And virtually everybody at Cue has touched either Q101 and or Q102. That 9 out of 10 molecules don't even make it past your enabling studies. And if they make it into the clinic, the attrition rate is about the same. So drug discovery, as you well know, Matt, is fraught with failure. So the fact that we've had this early success in science, we think is very meaningful. And I think it's important now to be very purposeful and deliberate on how do you extend this for patient benefit on scale. That brings us to how we think about strategic relationships, partnerships. Even if you think about companies, larger companies that are trying to protect and grow their franchises, let's look at checkpoint inhibitors. Most patients don't benefit from checkpoint inhibitors. I mean, they have been the success, but that's a well-known fact. And if you look at the 101, what we're observing, the initial data as a proxy for what this could be in potential combination, where you enhance and extend the reach by 2 to 3-fold, you're making a pretty significant impact. I mean, forget about the commercial side of things, which obviously has economics associated, but at a patient level, you're actually making something significantly more successful and meaningful for the individual. So I think that all thinking has to evolve into the partnerships we see, the folks we're talking with, and how we evolve the pipeline, and doing that very intentfully and purposefully, rather than just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. I mean, we've got to sort of follow that approach, and this is something we constantly internally debate and engage, and debate and engage.
Yeah. Very good. Well, I appreciate the time you guys have given me. I know I think I went over a little bit. You've been gracious. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me into the building. It's a beautiful facility. And I look forward to next time. We'll make sure that it's not, 150 episodes before we end up back on the show again.
Well, appreciate your interest in talking to us, so thank you.
I think there was a lot of value delivered. I think you guys did a great job conveying the value of not only what you're doing, but offering some value to our listenership who are, in many cases, seeing some of this stuff for the first time and relying on guys with gray beards to share advice. I say that because I have one. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, man.
That's Cue Biopharma CEO Dan Passeri and President and CSO Dr. Anish Suri. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community, in partnership with Cytiva, which you can learn about at cytiva.com/emergingbiotech. Then head over to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to sign up for our newsletter. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. We drop a fresh episode Monday morning like we always do. And in the meantime, thank you for listening.